Hola, en esta lección vamos a hablar acerca de los complementos directos e indirectos. Before watching this video, you might watch the previous videos about direct objects and the video on indirect objects. Otherwise, this video might be a little confusing. First, let's look at some sentences with direct objects. Escribo una carta. Mandamos regalos. Luis compra las flores. Ella presta su libro. Juan va a comprar un anillo. Ellos están explicando las reglas. So you should notice that the direct objects in all of these sentences came after the verb, and I changed the color of it so you can kind of see if it's masculine or feminine. Now, if we want to shorten these, once we know what we're talking about, we'll replace the direct object after the verb with a direct object pronoun, lo, la, los, las, which in most cases can go before the verb. So, let's do that to these sentences, changing the direct object to a direct object pronoun. Escribo una carta. La escribo. Mandamos regalos. Los mandamos. Luis compra las flores. Luis las compra. Ella presta su libro. Ella lo presta. Juan va a comprar un anillo. Juan lo va a comprar. O Juan va a comprarlo. You might also remember that if we have multiple verbs in a verb phrase, then we can attach the direct object pronoun lo, la, los, or las to the end of an infinitive verb. Ellos están explicando las reglas. Ellos las están explicando o ellos están explicándolas. And we can also attach these to the end of the ing form. If you're following so far, you can often do an action to someone or for someone. This is called an indirect object. So let's go ahead and add some indirect objects to these sentences to say who we're doing something to or who we're doing something for. Le escribo una carta. Les mandamos regalos. Luis le compra las flores. Ella me presta su libro. Juan le va a comprar un anillo. Ellos te están explicando las reglas. You might notice that the indirect objects sometimes might be mentioned more than once for clarification or for emphasis. This would include the indirect object pronoun, me, te, le, nos, os in Spain, les, and then also in the sentence you might see a plus a person. And this would be clarifying or emphasizing, but that part is optional. You'd need the first part, the me, te, le, nos, os, or les. Now, let's see what would happen if we changed the direct objects in these sentences to direct object pronouns. So I would have double object pronouns. So in the sentence, le escribo una carta, if I wanted to shorten it and say I write it to him, se la escribo. Les mandamos regalos, if I wanted to say we send them to them, se los mandamos. Luis le compra las flores. If I wanted to say Luis buys them for her, Luis se las compra. Ella me presta su libro. If I wanted to say she loans it to me, ella me lo presta. Juan le va a comprar un anillo. If I wanted to say Juan is going to buy it for her, Juan se lo va a comprar, o Juan va a comprárselo. So notice we can still attach these as well when you have two of them to the end. Without an accent mark though. Ellos te están explicando las reglas. If we want to say they are explaining them to you, ellos te las están explicando, o ellos están explicándotelas. And with INGs you can also attach this as well. So we can put both direct and indirect object pronouns in the sentence to speak more efficiently. Of course, we would only do this when we know what we are talking about. You wouldn't just say to somebody, lo tienes, that is, do you have it, if they didn't know what the it was referring to. So, as we just saw in the examples, the basic formula for indirect and direct object pronouns in the sentence is as follows. First, we'll have the subject if we need it for clarification or emphasis. Then we have the indirect object pronoun, me, te, le, nos, os in Spain, or les. Then the direct object pronoun, lo, la, los, or las. Then the verb phrase. Then if you wanted to clarify or emphasize who we're doing the action to or for to further reinforce the indirect object pronoun, then you can also put that here or other places in the sentence too. But in these shortened forms, notice that the indirect object pronoun goes first, then the direct object pronoun. So the me, te, le, nos, os, les will go before the lo, la, los, or las. Something you might have also noticed in some of the examples is that when I normally would have le or les before lo, la, los, or las, it changed to se. So instead of saying lelo, we'd say selo or sela, selos, selas. I can't give you a very good reason as to why we do this, except it's just what happens in the language. But a way to remember this change is the saying, you can't lay low. Confused? Well, let me show you one more example to see if it can help. So if Antonio were a generous guy and he loaned out his phone, his jacket, his shoes, and his keys to a bunch of people, we would use the form of the verb prestó, he loaned, and then we would use the indirect objects to tell who he loaned them to. So if he were to loan these things to me, me prestó su teléfono, he loaned his phone to me. But if I wanted to make it shorter and say he loaned his phone to me, me lo prestó. If he loaned me his jacket, me prestó su chaqueta. If I want to say he loaned me it, me la prestó. If he loaned me his shoes, me prestó sus zapatos. If he loaned me them, me los prestó. If he loaned me his keys, me prestó sus llaves. But if we know we're talking about keys already, I could just say, me las prestó. Now, if he instead loaned these things to you, te prestó su teléfono. Once we know we're talking about a telephone, we could say, te lo prestó. Te prestó su chaqueta. Te la prestó. Te prestó sus zapatos. Te los prestó. Te prestó sus llaves. Te las prestó. Now, if he loaned these things to Carlos or to Ana or to you formal, we'd have to use le. So, if Antonio loaned his phone to Carlos, Ana, or to you formal, le prestó su teléfono. If I wanted to say he loaned it to Carlos, Ana, or to you formal, se lo prestó. Remember, you can't lay low. If it was instead his jacket that he loaned, le prestó su chaqueta, or se la prestó. If he loaned his shoes, Carlos, Ana, or to you formal, le prestó sus zapatos. He loaned them, se los prestó. So really you can't lay low, lay la, lay los, or lay las, right? Le prestó sus llaves, se las prestó. Now, if he were to instead have loaned these things to us, nos prestó su teléfono, he loaned it to us, nos lo prestó. Nos prestó su chaqueta, he loaned it to us, nos la prestó. Nos prestó sus zapatos, nos los prestó. Nos prestó sus llaves, nos las prestó. And finally, if you were to have loaned these things to a group of people, ellos, or to you all, ustedes, then we would use les. Les prestó su teléfono, se lo prestó. Again, notice you can't lay low, and in this case you can't les low. Doesn't sound as cool though. Les prestó su chaqueta, se la prestó. Les prestó sus zapatos, se los prestó. Les prestó sus llaves, se las prestó. Are you getting it? Maybe a little bit? Well, there is one more thing I should clarify. While in the basic formula, the indirect object pronoun and the direct object pronoun go before the verb phrase, They might be found after the verb phrase in some familiar cases. So let's look at those two examples from the beginning of the video again. If you remember from the previous videos on indirect and direct objects, we can attach the pronouns to the end of infinitive verbs, verbs ending in an R, and after the ing form of the verbs. So in the examples from before, Juan va a comprar un anillo would be the direct object. If I have the direct object pronoun, then instead Juan lo va a comprar, Juan va a comprarlo. If I add the indirect object, Juan le va a comprar un anillo, a ella would be optional, or Juan va a comprarle un anillo. But if I wanted to do the double object pronouns, that is the indirect and direct, Juan se lo va a comprar, a ella is optional, y Juan va a comprárselo. Notice I have to add an accent on the vowel before the R, though, to keep the emphasis. So when you add the two pronouns to the infinitive, you'll need an accent mark. And the other example, ellos están explicando las reglas, where we have the direct object. We want to change it to a direct object pronoun. Ellos las están explicando, o ellos están explicándolas, with the accent over the vowel before the NDO. But if we wanted to add the indirect object also to the sentence, ellos te están explicando las reglas, o ellos están explicándote las reglas, with the accent mark on the ing form. And if you wanted to instead use the double object pronoun idea, then you could say ellos te las están explicando, or you could attach them, ellos están explicándotelas, and you can attach because this is an ing. So again, you can attach to infinitive verbs and to the ing, and you'd have an accent mark on them though. So, in short, the basic order or formula would be the subject, the indirect object, the direct object, the verb phrase, and optional, the indirect object clarification or emphasis. But if you have an infinitive verb, you have a second possibility, a second way you can use. When there's the infinitive verb, then you can use the subject, the verb phrase. In the verb phrase, you can attach the indirect object and the direct object to the end of the infinitive verb, the one that ends in an R. And make sure to add an accent mark to the vowel before the R. And then you can also have the indirect object clarification, that is, who you do something to or for if you need to clarify or emphasize. And if there's an ing in the sentence, this is the possible secondary formula you could use. The subject, the verb plus the ing form, and to the ing form you can attach the indirect object and direct object, adding the accent mark over the last vowel of the ing, that is the one before the NDO. And then optionally, you can have the indirect object clarification or emphasis to tell who something done to or for. And one more thing. When you use the direct and indirect object pronouns in the sentence, where one goes, the other must go as well. So, in the sentence, Juan se lo va a comprar, or Juan va a comprárselo, it would be incorrect to separate the direct and indirect object pronouns. You couldn't say, Juan le va a comprarlo a ella. No, it wouldn't sound right. And you couldn't say Juan lo va a comprarle a ella. That doesn't sound right. You'd have to say Juan se lo va a comprar or Juan va a comprárselo. It has to stay together. Whew! That's it for this video on using double object pronouns. Let me know if you have any questions or comments about this video. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for updates on new free Spanish video lessons. If you'd like to practice the double object pronouns, click on any of these videos. Gracias por mirar y nos vemos.